Usually, when we think about a religious framework, there is this built-in expectation of shelter.
Right, like a sturdy house.
Exactly. You picture this sturdy house. You walk through the front door, you lock it behind you, and, you are entirely safe from the storm raging outside.
It basically functions as a refuge, a place where the foundation is solid and you're standing inside that house is secure, regardless of the weather.
But then you step into certain highly specific theological structures, and suddenly you look around and realize there are no walls.
Yeah, you aren't in a house at all.
Right. It's a tightrope, suspended over a massive canyon in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane. And you, listening right now, are the one who has to walk it.
Which is an incredibly stressful image.
It really is. And today we are walking out onto that tightrope with you. We're doing a deep dive into a heavily researched presentation by Miles Christian on his YouTube channel, Answering Adventism.
Yeah, the presentation is called Why Adventism Puts Your Salvation at Risk.
And we are using this incredibly detailed source to explore a really profound psychological and spiritual question. Why do followers of the Seventh-day Adventist faith, often referred to as the SDA Church, frequently struggle to have absolute assurance of their own salvation?
Just to be completely clear up front, our mission today isn't to take theological sides.
Yeah.
We aren't here to declare winners and losers in some religious debate.
Definitely not.
Right. We are just taking an impartial, analytical journey directly into the source material Miles Christian presents.
Yeah.
We want to understand the mechanics of this belief system.
Because when you look at the architecture of a worldview, you really start to see how that specific framing can fundamentally alter a person's daily reality. It changes their baseline anxiety and, well, their entire understanding of what good news actually means.
It absolutely does.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand why an individual in this system might struggle to feel secure, we first have to understand the universe they believe they inhabit. Because according to our source, everything in Adventism hinges on a very unique origin story. They call it the Great Controversy Paradigm.
And that paradigm is the engine driving every other concept we're going to discuss today. The source quotes an SDA theologian named Herbert Douglas, who explicitly states that this great controversy theme governs how the church defines literally everything.
Wow, everything.
Everything. It redefines justification, it redefines the gospel itself, and it even changes the fundamental reason why Jesus came to earth.
The presentation lays out the narrative like this. Before earth was even created, Satan rebelled in heaven. But his core argument wasn't just a simple power grab.
No, it was much more specific than that.
Exactly. His accusation was that God's law was inherently unfair. Satan claimed it was actually impossible for created beings to keep the law. So in a very real sense, God is put on trial before the watching universe.
What's fascinating here is how this entirely shifts the narrative focus away from human rescue. I mean, in traditional Orthodox Christianity, Jesus comes to earth primarily to save humanity from the penalty of sin.
Right, that's the standard view.
But in this great controversy worldview, saving humanity is positioned as almost a secondary byproduct. The primary overriding reason Jesus came to earth was to vindicate God's character.
He had to prove to the rest of the unfallen universe that Satan was a liar and that the law actually can be kept perfectly by a human being.
Yes, and that changes the whole dynamic.
I love visualizing these massive concepts, so let's frame this as an analogy. Imagine a colossal multi-billion-dollar corporate lawsuit. You have the CEO of the universe, that's God, and he is being publicly accused by a disgruntled former executive, which is Satan.
That's a great way to look at it.
The accusation is that the CEO set impossible key performance indicators, impossible KPIs for the employees, and those KPIs represent the law.
So following that logic, human beings are no longer just the grateful beneficiaries of the CEO's generosity. We are star witnesses subpoenaed to the witness stand.
Or on the stand.
Right. The burden of proof shifts.
Yeah.
We have to consistently hit those KPIs to prove to the corporate board, the watching universe, that the CEO's metrics aren't impossible.
Which is a terrifying amount of responsibility to place on a flawed human being on like a random Tuesday. If I'm the star witness, my personal peace is totally irrelevant.
Totally irrelevant.
The entire weight of this cosmic trial falls right onto my shoulders. I have to prove God right.
The psychological pressure of that is just immense. And because the overarching mission of the entire universe has shifted to vindicating God's law in this cosmic courtroom, the very definition of the gospel has to be dramatically expanded to fit that new legal reality.
And that brings us to a major distinction Miles Christian highlights in his presentation. He points out that Adventism draws a very hard line between what they call the limited gospel and what they believe is their unique everlasting gospel.
Yeah, the source explains that the SDA Church views the traditional Protestant Christian gospel as limited. That traditional view focuses strictly on Christ's death, his resurrection, and the free forgiveness of sins.
Just the core events.
Exactly. But Adventism teaches that this isn't enough to win the cosmic lawsuit. Instead, they point to Revelation chapter 14 to establish their everlasting gospel, which they claim only became active from the year 1844 onward.
But wait, we have to pause on that date because 1844 is thrown around a lot in the source. Why 1844? What supposedly changed then to activate this new version of the gospel?
So, according to the presentation, 1844 is the year Adventists believe a prophetic timeline ended, triggering a massive shift in heaven. They teach that Jesus moved into a new phase of his ministry called the investigative judgment.
The investigative judgment.
Yeah. To borrow your corporate analogy, 1844 is the year the ultimate high-stakes cosmic audit began. Heaven's books were opened, and God started actively investigating the lives of believers to see whose characters were actually worthy of salvation.
Wait, if I'm understanding the source correctly, believing Jesus died for you isn't enough. This everlasting gospel includes an ongoing investigation into my daily behavior.
That's what the source claims.
That sounds terrifying. And it isn't just about belief, it's this massive umbrella that encompasses the entire theological framework of their church. It includes keeping the seventh-day Sabbath. It includes passing this investigative judgment. It includes the prophetic writings of their founder, Ellen G. White.
Which they elevate as the spirit of prophecy. Yeah.
Right. And it even mandates their health message. You have to follow a specific diet to be saved.
The inclusion of the health message is honestly one of the most striking details Miles Christian explores. He pulls up primary documents stating that abstaining from certain foods and drinks is heavily intertwined with their preparation for the end times.
I have to push back on this because it sounds almost absurd from the outside. Where do tea and coffee fit into a cosmic lawsuit? The source explicitly mentions giving up meat, tea, and coffee. How does a vegetarian diet help vindicate the creator of the universe?
It all comes back to the mechanics of that corporate audit we talked about. The source argues that in STA theology, strict physical discipline is required to maintain peak moral sensibilities.
Okay, moral sensibilities.
Right. The logic goes that meat and caffeine dull the brain and inflame lower passions. If your brain is dulled by a cup of Earl Grey tea, you might succumb to temptation.
Oh, wow.
And if you succumb to temptation, you fail the investigative judgment. If you fail the audit, you prove Satan's point that the law is impossible to keep.
So a cup of coffee literally jeopardizes the cosmic case. That is a staggering chain of causality. And because they believe they are the only ones holding this complete everlasting gospel, the source notes that the SDA Church views itself as the exclusive remnant church at the end of time.
Yes, the remnant.
They have a life or death mission to call everyone else out of Babylon, which is their term for all other Christian denominations.
Think about the isolating effect of that worldview. If you are sitting in a traditional Baptist, Methodist, or Presbyterian church, according to this framework, you are trapped in Babylon.
You're completely ignorant of the audit.
Exactly. You are entirely ignorant of the ongoing cosmic audit. You must leave and join the remnant to be safe.
It creates an incredibly rigid, all-or-nothing ecosystem. You can't just agree to disagree on theology over breakfast. When a specific diet or a specific day of worship is packaged into the very definition of the gospel, questioning a minor tenet feels like rejecting salvation entirely.
Right. Secondary behavioral doctrines are suddenly elevated to foundational, salvation-critical issues. You aren't just breaking a dietary guideline, you are risking eternal destruction because you are failing to vindicate God.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If this everlasting gospel includes all of these strict rules, the Sabbath, the diet, the moral acuity, and the entire goal is to prove Satan wrong, well, what happens when the believer inevitably makes a mistake? Because humans are messy. We slip up.
We definitely fail.
Yeah.
And the system has a specific mechanism for that, which brings a crushing weight of behavioral expectation. The source explains that in SDA theology, believers are essentially placed on probation.
Probation, like a criminal waiting to see if their parole is revoked.
Quite literally. They are being continuously tested. God has to see if they can be trusted not to let sin enter the newly recreated earth.
Because of what happened before.
Exactly. The narrative is that Lucifer supposedly jeopardized the peace of heaven once. God cannot risk allowing a flawed human to start the rebellion all over again. So the believer must constantly demonstrate that they are safe to save.
But how do I demonstrate I am safe? I assume I have to show I am growing or, at least trying my best.
Actually, trying your best isn't enough to win the cosmic lawsuit. Miles Christian points out that this probation demands achieving a state of sinless perfectionism.
Sinless perfectionism, that's a heavy phrase.
It is. Obedience functions as the ultimate barometer for your salvation. You have to perfectly replicate Jesus' flawless character.
The presenter quotes the SDA prophet Ellen G. White directly on this, and the quote is absolutely jarring. She wrote, "It's not that men cannot keep the law, but that they will not."
And that specific framing is pivotal. It entirely removes human frailty as a valid excuse.
Right, it's not a capability issue, it's a willpower issue.
Exactly. In this theological view, Jesus' crucifixion, marks, his actual physical scars, are presented as living proof standing before the universe that the law can be kept perfectly in human flesh. Therefore, humans have absolutely no excuse for failing to keep the commandments perfectly.
If you are listening to this on your commute right now, I want you to imagine the psychological toll of that reality. If your personal salvation and the literal vindication of the Almighty Creator requires you to replicate Jesus' flawless obedience, every single bad day becomes a cosmic catastrophe.
The stakes of normal human behavior become unimaginably high.
You lose your temper in traffic, you didn't just have a bad morning, you actively gave Satan ammunition in the cosmic trial. You crave a piece of chicken or snap at your kids, you are failing your probation.
Yeah.
The finish line isn't just distant, it demands absolute flawless perfection to cross it.
Miles Christian tackles this head-on by heavily critiquing this blending of law and gospel. He argues that this specific system teaches that Jesus' death on the cross only made salvation possible.
It just opened the door.
Right, it opened the door. But your own perfect character development, your own flawless law-keeping, is what makes your salvation final.
So it's Jesus plus your own perfect performance. Jesus gets you an interview at the company, but your flawless KPI metrics are what keep you from getting fired.
That's a brutal way to work.
It is, which brings us directly to the core conflict of this entire deep dive. If you are living under that immense burden of perfection, it explains exactly why the source argues that absolute assurance of salvation is essentially impossible within this framework.
It is logically incompatible with assurance. To prove this, the presentation contrasts the SDA worldview with the traditional Orthodox Protestant view, relying heavily on the writings of the Apostle Paul in books like Galatians and 1 Corinthians.
According to the source, the biblical text teaches there is only one gospel. There is no distinction between a limited gospel and an 1844 everlasting gospel.
No.
The good news, as Paul defines it, is singularly focused on the person and the finished work of Jesus Christ, his death, his burial, and his resurrection. Full stop.
The presenter points specifically to Ephesians chapter 1 to explain how assurance functions in that traditional Orthodox view. In Ephesians, when a person hears and believes that exact message of Christ's finished work, the text says they are immediately sealed with the Holy Spirit.
And a seal is permanent. It's an immediate guaranteed down payment on their inheritance. It is the exact opposite of an ongoing, anxiety-inducing investigative judgment.
Precisely the point the source is making. In the traditional Protestant framework, peace with God is based strictly on what Christ already accomplished perfectly.
Yeah.
It is not contingent on the believer's future performance on probation.
It's a done deal.
Right. Obedience to God is viewed as the natural fruit of already having eternal life. You obey because your heart has been changed and you are deeply grateful. You do not obey as a mechanism to maintain your salvation or prove you are worthy to pass an audit.
Miles Christian also references Romans chapter 7, which is a famous passage where Paul talks about the agonizing, ongoing struggle humans experience. Paul writes about having good days and bad days, wanting to do good, but ending up doing the very thing he hates.
We all know that feeling.
Exactly. And the presenter's argument is that because human beings are inherently flawed and stuck in this struggle, relying on your own obedience to maintain right standing with God inherently destroys any possibility of having peace.
You cannot possibly have assurance if the mandatory condition for that assurance is your own flawless behavior. You will be trapped in a perpetual cycle of wondering, did I do enough today?
Was my motive completely pure when I helped that person?
Right. Did I accidentally break a subtle rule and fail my probation?
So, what does this all mean? Put yourself in those shoes for a moment. Imagine living under a system where the finish line is a mirage that keeps moving further away. You are told you are saved by grace, but you are kept on the heavenly roster entirely by your own flawless performance review.
It sounds exhausting.
The source portrays this not just as a dry theological error, but as a profound human tragedy. People are exhausting themselves, striving in absolute fear to earn a peace that, according to traditional biblical texts, was supposed to be a free, unearned gift.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals a structural truth about this specific theology that is hard to ignore. The severe lack of assurance that Adventists struggle with isn't a glitch. It isn't a bug in the system. It is a necessary feature.
Wait, say more about that. How is anxiety a feature?
Think all the way back to the great controversy paradigm we started with, the cosmic lawsuit. If the universe's ultimate goal is proving to Satan that God's law can be kept perfectly by human beings, then human anxiety, fear of failure, and perpetual striving are the required engines to keep that theology moving forward.
Because if they felt safe, they might stop trying so hard.
Exactly. If believers felt perfectly secure and assured of their salvation, they might relax. They might stop striving for that impossible, sinless perfection.
And if they stop striving, the entire cosmic trial falls apart.
God loses the lawsuit. The theology demands the anxiety of the believer to fuel the vindication of the Creator.
That is incredibly heavy. The theology literally requires you to be terrified of failure in order to function.
It really does.
Let's briefly recap the journey we've taken through this source material today. We started by exploring a unique origin story, the Great Controversy, where God and Satan are logged in a cosmic courtroom battle over the fairness of the law.
And to meet the demanding evidence required for this trial, we saw how the definition of the gospel was expanded into an everlasting gospel.
Right. This new gospel requires adherence to dietary rules, Sabbath keeping, and belief in an ongoing investigative judgment that started in 1844.
Which logically placed the individual believer on a rigorous, terrifying probation. A high-stakes test where they must achieve sinless perfection, even regulating their caffeine intake, to prove they won't ruin a newly created earth.
And ultimately, according to Miles Christian's analysis, that framework aggressively strips away the comforting assurance of salvation found in traditional interpretations of Paul's letters. It replaces the quiet rest of a finished work with the exhausting, unending anxiety of a cosmic performance review.
It creates a stark, undeniable contrast. On one side, you have a finished work that provides a sturdy house, a refuge from the storm.
Yeah.
On the other, you have a cosmic trial where you are the star witness on a tightrope, knowing you cannot afford a single misstep.
As we promised at the beginning, we aren't here to tell you who is theologically right or wrong, but I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over on your own. It's a question that wasn't explicitly mentioned in our discussion of the source, but it builds directly out of everything we've just unpacked.
Okay, let's hear it.
If a theology demands absolute, flawless human perfection in order to vindicate an all-powerful creator, does that framework inadvertently make the creator seem remarkably insecure? Think about it.
Oh, wow.
Does it make an almighty sovereign God look oddly dependent on the flawless behavior of highly flawed humans just to win an argument with a fallen angel?
That is a deeply paradigm-shifting question to consider.
Think about how the framing of any belief system, whether it's a religious worldview, a high-pressure corporate culture, or even a toxic family dynamic, directly engineers the mental health and the baseline anxiety of the people living inside it.
It shapes everything.
We talked at the very beginning about wanting a house, a shelter from the storm, but ending up suspended on a tightrope in a hurricane.
Right.
So look at your own life. What hidden probations might you be living under today? What invisible tightropes are you currently walking, exhausted and anxious, trying to prove your worth to a system that demands your absolute perfection?
Something to really think about.
We'll leave you with that to ponder. Until next time, keep diving deep.